To Catch a Predator was a cultural phenomenon when it aired from 2004 to 2007. The premise of the program: catching child predators in real life. Grown men would engage in sexually explicit conversations with who they thought were either a teenage girl or boy on the internet, and then show up at their house with the intention of sexually exploiting the minor. What they didn't know was that the minor was actually a decoy, and journalist Chris Hansen, flanked by a camera crew, was waiting for him inside, while law enforcement typically surrounded the perimeter outside. Predators, a new documentary, explores the complicated legacy of the crime show that captured the zeitgeist of the early 2000s. The film's director, David Osit, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is David Osit, the director of the documentary Predators. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
The opening to your documentary, which explores the legacy of To Catch a Predator, was one of the most chilling first scenes of a film I've ever seen. It has this conversation, and you can hear the voice of what sounds like a young girl and an adult man. The conversation was disturbing. He asked the young girl if she was nervous, said they had to be really careful. He calls her a precious little princess. I mean, it was just really sinister stuff. And it made me immediately remember why people were so enthralled with To Catch a Predator, which aired 20 years ago, because there was nothing like it on TV beforehand. So I know you watched it when it aired, and I'm thinking, what made you decide to revisit it now, 20 years later, and talk about the legacy?
It was exactly what you just described. It was this first phone call that you hear in the movie is one of the first times I encountered some of the raw material that went into the making of the show. I remembered watching the show. I remembered it kind of as a darkly funny, kind of gross, sick sort of like thing that you watched in college, basically. And then I forgot about it really. But I remember, discovering this raw material and this outtakes from the show or chat logs that were conducted between the decoys and the men, um, or seeing their police interrogation footage, or seeing the raw material of them showing up to the Sting house, and just really being struck by how much more horrifying it was at times. And also at times, I would find myself, to my shock, feeling kind of sad for these guys. Just some of them just seemed like they had no idea what was going on, what they were doing. Some of them seemed basically mentally ill. Some of them asking for therapists, things like that. I just remember thinking, wow, I don't know how to feel about this. And why does the edited show make me feel differently than the unedited material? And I really wanted to make a film investigating that difference.
And I want you to talk about those feelings because I had the same experience where I watched it when it aired 20 years ago, didn't watch it since. And then in your documentary, when you see bits and pieces, it is drastically different than how you remember it because Chris Hansen, like you said, darkly funny. I mean, the crux of it is horrifying, what they're catching predators that are on the internet trying to exploit young children. But Chris Hansen, he would have funny quips in there, and then you would just see these guys, immediately realize that the trouble that they are going to get in. But you said this in another interview that your documentary is not at all defending child predators or defending this, but it's more so asking what happens when we see what we perceive as the bottom of society. What happens when we're laughing at the worst day of their life, essentially? What do you think is the answer to that question?
Well, I mean, to ask it again, I mean, it's like if this is about, it's not about deterring people from showing up and doing these things. That's not the goal of the show. Obviously, you can tell it's not, because people show up to be on the set having been fans of the show, right? Like that's there's times when people show up recognizing Chris Hansen, wanting to shake his hand. Like this has happened now for 20 years. Chris is still doing the show. He's still catching many people. There's now an entire culture of online vigilante predator hunters who are doing similar things. So this doesn't make it go away. So if we're clear about that, then what is the point of it? Is it to let people know about it when we know about it? Right? We know this happens. I think it's perhaps outsized now in terms of the expectation that this is reporting on a crime that is as frequent, whereas a large majority of sexual crimes against children happens to people who are already known to the child, not the quote unquote stranger danger that we always read about. It's oftentimes people who already know a child. It's oftentimes people who are themselves victims who kind of perpetuate this cycle. The show's not interested in that sort of conversation, which is fair. It doesn't have to be. But then what's it for? is it for us at home to watch it? Basically, at a certain point, it turns into entertainment. And I think that's the question that intrigued me, is at what point does it become entertainment and how and why? And I think we don't really think a lot about how true crime is often basically at times taking stories from people and not really thinking about what the cost of those stories are when it comes to the human toll. And I'm not even necessarily talking about the men accused of being predators here. I'm also talking about family members and people who also have to deal with the repercussions of their identities being public forever.
To that point, it really seemed like there were two separate camps in this documentary when it came to how they felt about the legacy of To Catch a Predator 20 years later. And one camp seemed to be the people who said, these are the worst of the worst in society, and I don't really care what happens to them. And to catch them at any cost, that's fine with me. And there's another group of people that perhaps they didn't really want to mix criminal justice and entertainment. One of the law enforcement officials that you spoke to for the documentary, they said, I am in the law enforcement business, not show business. Where do you sit in all of this?
Great question. And I think there's no easy solution because I'm not a law enforcement officer. Um, I'm also someone who can see the obvious effect that it has to publicize an issue, to then cast light on it. And I think that I keep thinking the mental image I had in my head as you were asking that question is that old thing of a frog in water and they turn up the heat, right? At a certain point, do we jump out when the water gets too hot and when we start to realize that perhaps we've gone too far? There's no easy line in the sand when it comes to deciding whether something is maybe being exploited or a story is being exploited for clicks, as someone says in the film at some point when it comes to thinking about these online predator hunting situations. So there's no easy answer to those questions, but they're rarely asked because, like you said, we decide that for some people it doesn't matter what happens to them because they're not really human beings anymore. And that's a decision that some people really make. And I mean, I talk about in the film how I myself was a survivor of child sexual assault. And I think that for me, despite that, I still kind of can't just um, I can't just say that anyone who is a predator is not a human being. Unfortunately, they are. I mean, that's the whole point. They are human beings. They weren't born as child sexual predators. At a certain point, they became that, but they're still humans. And what happens to a human being when there's no solutions? And what happens to our society when we decide that these people can't be salvaged? They're going to keep coming. So what do we do? What do we do about it? And is the solution to find entertainment in it? I'm not sure.
And this was definitely not a conversation when To Catch a Predator was on back in the early 2000s. People were gleeful at seeing, predators get in trouble, realize their life is over. The police are all outside, they storm the predator, and then that's it. And then, we click off our TV and move on with our lives. And even in the documentary, what struck me too is just seeing how it was talked about on media and in talk show interviews and things like that. Even To Catch a Predator was parodied on South Park. And the way we talked about it then certainly is not the way that we're talking about it now. And in the documentary, there's aired footage from To Catch a Predator, unaired footage. There's interviews with people who played the decoy actors on the show, interviews with Chris Hansen wannabes and Chris Hansen himself. So was there any one piece of footage or was there any interview that you had that really changed your perspective, perhaps on To Catch a Predator's legacy?
So many of them, so many of the interviews in the film impacted how I feel about not just the Catch a Predator's legacy, but even just the nature of true crime entertainment in the first place. And I would say that one of the things that stood out to me the most was when I interviewed several of the decoys who were involved not only in the show, but in the modern spin-offs of the show. And showing them some of the raw footage that I watched and had my own complex feelings about. And it's really remarkable. I basically filmed many people watching this raw footage that I myself watched and had sort of an emotional interaction with that was different than the show. And I was surprised to see that I wasn't the only one, to be honest, that people who were even more passionate about the show than I was in any direction, people who firmly believed, to bring up your earlier point, that these are not human beings. They deserve to be, shot, killed, dragged into the streets, would watch this raw footage and also start to try to kind of transform their thoughts and feelings before my eyes. And that was remarkable. It was remarkable to see that over and over again, to see people's opinions and minds change while watching something. We think of editing when it comes to a TV show as something that makes you feel something. But in this case, when it comes to true crime, editing is actually what takes the feelings away. It was watching this raw footage and being confronted with someone's humanity, whether they're a bad person or not, that makes you kind of wonder, wow, what am I supposed to be entertained by when it comes to watching this person's life end?
The ethnographer that is in the documentary pointed this out, but I found it fascinating as a viewer back then and now that at some points when the predators are sitting there, Chris Hansen walks out, they realize who Chris Hansen is, and they immediately, the life drains out of their face. Or once Chris Hansen starts talking, they see the camera crew, they know what's happening. Once they have that recognition of, oh, I know exactly what's happening, they start covering their face. They realize just how bad this is. And back when this first aired, those moments were the best for the viewer, right? Because when you see that someone recognized Chris Hansen, aside from this being just a heinous, horrific crime, there's also the fact of this person knew that this program existed. They knew who Chris Hansen was. They knew that they could be featured on Dateline, and they still chose to engage in this horrific behavior anyway. And some people, when they were caught, they had thoughts of self-harm. One person in Texas, when they had saw the Dateline crew and they saw law enforcement circling their house, they ended up ending their life. Some people said that they needed help and they almost felt a sense of relief when they saw Chris Hansen and when they were caught. And one person, when they saw Chris Hansen walk out, they apologized to Chris Hansen. They apologized to the crew there. But nothing that I heard, and what really angered me as a viewer, is I did not hear one of these men apologize at all to the victim that they thought that they were coming here to sexually exploit. And I know as a viewer that that was a decoy, but they did not know. And they didn't apologize to the potential child they were there to harm. They didn't apologize to that person's family, that child's family whose life could be potentially significantly forever altered from this incident had it gone the other way. And thankfully, it was just a decoy and not a real child. I mean, I know that you mentioned that you're a survivor. Did you think that after watching that and perhaps having a similar thought, do you think that To Catch a Predator is really about victims or survivors at all?
Yeah, I don't think that To Catch a Predator is about the victims. It's called To Catch a Predator. It's about finding these criminals, these bad guys, catching them, putting them away. We're not interested so much in how they got to where they are, or what to do with them after they're caught. It's about catching, and it's about, I think, giving the audience an experience of being able to enjoy the fact that these bad guys are put away. And that's kind of a thing that happens in true crime is it's a it's basically, you can enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with you if you enjoy it, but like, it's a pretty one-dimensional thing. It's like good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys get caught, and you get to be at home kind of safe and enjoying the fact that these bad guys are caught, and that's the story. Uh, so I mean, I think that one of the things that I was interested in making a film about is kind of, well, why do we need that narrative so much? And what happens if some other narratives sneak in, which is maybe what the show is designed to avoid happening, which is the show, can't be too complicated, or else, as Mark Duran, the ethnographer, puts it in the film, the show kind of breaks down. It can't really hold complexity. That's not how Law and Order works. That's not how good guys and bad guys works.
And To Catch a Predator is synonymous with Chris Hansen, the show's host. And he was really seen as this vigilante, this hero back in the day. He would confront these predators. He would ask them, why did you do this? He had the printout of their conversations. He would say, why are you here? Then he would say, you're free to leave. Obviously, they really weren't that free to leave because they were immediately apprehended once they stepped foot outside. You spoke with him. What was that conversation like?
We talked a lot, and I talked to him very early on in production. I told him I wanted to film with him because I saw him basically as the sort of godfather of this genre, of that he was able to kind of blend law enforcement and journalism together to create entertainment. And he agreed, and we talked about that. And it was fascinating to see the ways that we were similar and the ways that we were different. We both believe in what we're doing. We both believe in, kind of what we do for a living. And I find it helpful for me as a filmmaker. And in particular with this film, I really tried to approach everybody in the film thinking about what did we have in common, not what separated us, which at times was hard to do. There's some people who I disagree with a lot who I filmed, but that's the one thing that this show or other shows would never would it's kind of scary to do that. It's not a safe place to be for me, especially to go out here and talk about how I made a film that's trying to look at pedophiles as human beings. That's not like an okay thing to do. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people feel upset by that. But I'm looking at someone as a human being doesn't forgive them of their crime. And it doesn't mean that their crime is not horrendous. And it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be punished. It's saying that if you see that someone's a human being, they kind of automatically still get to be treated as human beings. And that's a really uncomfortable place for people when it comes to this particular crime because it's like the worst thing you can do in the world. And we kind of need villains in this world. Like the world is scary and it's full of awful people, and we want awful people to not be in our lives. So what do we do when we're confronted with an ultimate crime? And shows like To Catch a Predator kind of help build up an idea that, well, the solution is let's just get them away from our sight. And what happens next? The show's not accountable for that. And it can't be because that's not within the rules of true crime.
And to that point, I mean, the internet, people didn't really know the dangers of the internet as much as they know them now, 20 years ago. The internet was not, I mean, it was not completely a foreign concept, but you didn't know that there was danger lurking anywhere like we know now. And I think that the show brought that to light, but it didn't get to the root of why this was happening. I mean, do you think that the show overall was a value add for society?
I think it's too hard to say. I think that I'll answer your question with a brief anecdote, which is that Chris had me on his podcast. Chris Hansen had me on his podcast a couple of months ago, and he asked me the question, should I still do these investigations? Which I was really shocked to hear him ask me that question, but it was a really good one. And kind of my answer was kind of like, I'm not sure these are investigations anymore. We're not learning at this point in time, I don't think, that there's such a thing as online child predation. I think we know by now that this happens. I think what we're seeing now is a way to enjoy it, as awful as that is to say. What happens to someone like me becomes entertainment for someone like you. And I think that's where I have trouble. And I think that's what my issue is with some of these shows. And there's no doubt that when it first was unveiled to the popular audience of the world, this was revealing something awful and sordid and fascinating that was happening. And at a certain point, to use my frog in boiling water analogy again, it became something else.
And at the very end of the documentary, you're asked if you got everything that you wanted. Now, sitting here, the documentary's done. We're having these really deep, complicated, messy conversations about this show that last aired almost 20 years ago. Did you get everything you wanted? What does that really look like for you?
It's not about the answer, it's about the question. It's about what do we try to get from people when we can't find answers? What do we do to people when we can't find answers to difficult questions, such as why would someone abuse a child or hurt a child or prey on a child? The whole nature of the genre of true crime is kind of built on not necessarily getting answers to questions, but by trying to just make peace and sense out of the world and to make it feel a little bit better, a little bit safer, and with a little more clarity as to maybe why something happened, but also kind of that threat is over, that threat is gone. And my what I'm positing kind of in this film is that I think that all of us are part of this cycle of and I say all of us meaning audiences, filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, journalists, law enforcement, predators. We're all being able to, in certain ways, engage in predatory behavior when it comes to what we choose to enjoy, what we choose to watch, and what we choose to question or not question.
Well, David, I appreciate it. I appreciate the conversation. Predators is now streaming on Paramount Plus. Thank you so, so much for joining me. I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.